Section 6.7 is where you're going to be using the distance formula and the slope formula in order to classify if a triangle is scalene, isosceles, or equilateral. And then we're also going to classify a quadrilateral, what type it is. So I gave you these formulas just to remind you we will not be using the midpoint formula because I threw those problems out. So, first question is asking us to decide if our triangle is scalene, isosceles, or equilateral. So you need to know what those words actually mean. So remember, scalene means I have 0 sides equal. Isosceles means I have 2 sides equal. And equilateral means I have 3 sides that are equal to each other. So first thing I would do is look at my picture, and I see that I have these 3 vertices. So since those coordinates are not wrote down for me, I would go ahead and write those down. So point A is 0, 1, point B is 4, 4, point C is 7, 0. Next thing is, if I'm trying to figure out how many sides are congruent, I'm going to need to know the lengths of those sides. So this is where you're going to be using the distance formula up at the top in order to find what those lengths are. So you're going to have to find the distance 3 times since I have 3 different side lengths. So I just started with the first one. I did AC first, doesn't matter which one you do first. I plugged in my values here, so it says take my x's and subtract them, so I did 0 minus 7, and then squared it, and then I subtracted my y's, 1 minus 0, and squared it. So when I squared that x value, I got 49. When I squared that difference, I got 1. And then I did the square root after I added them and got 7.1 for that distance length. So then I went and did the second one, so I picked BC to do second and did the same formula. So I subtracted my x's, got -3, squared it and got 9, subtracted my y's, got 4, squared it, got 16, did the square root of 25 and got 5 for my length. And then the last line, I did AB, so I subtracted my x's, got -4, squared it, got 16, subtracted my y's, got -3, squared it, and got 9, did the square root of that sum, and got 5. So notice that you have these 2 lengths equal to each other. So if I have 2 side lengths congruent to each other, my triangle is an isosceles triangle. So now I want you to pause your video and go ahead and try the next question. Alright, so on the next one, you're doing the same thing in the Got It, trying to figure out what kind of triangle it is. So if you like having a visual, you can go ahead and graph it. You don't necessarily need a visual because you're just finding the length. So I went through and found the length of all 3. So for length DE, I got 4.1 rounded. For length EF, I got 4.5 rounded. And for length of DF, I got 5.4. So noticing that none of those are congruent, so this triangle would be scalene. Okay, so second type of question is I'm going to give you a quadrilateral and you're going to have to decide what type of quadrilateral it is. So first thing is I tried to put together a cheat sheet for you so that you kind of know the process of what we're going to do. So I would encourage you to write this down somewhere on your note-taking guide. So first question we're going to start with is, are 4 sides congruent? If my answer is no, then I'm going to check for 4 right angles, and then based off of those 2 answers, I'll know which type of quadrilateral it is. If I answer yes that I have 4 sides are congruent and I have 4 right angles, then I could either say it's a square, or if it doesn't, say it's a rhombus. So I'm always going to start with 4 sides congruent, and I'm always going to check if the 4 right angles, and then after that I should know which type it is. So if you want to jot that down somewhere so you have that flow chart, you're welcome to. Otherwise, let's go ahead and start with this first example. So they give me a list of coordinates. So if, again, you're a visual person, I gave you a graph so you could go ahead and graph those. So clearly it's a quadrilateral, but I am not sure what shape it is based off what it looks like. So first thing I would ask are all 4 sides congruent? So in order to decide if that's the case, I'm going to have to use the distance formula and check if all four sides are congruent. Now keep in mind, most of the time the opposite sides would be congruent, so you probably want to check the sides that are close to each other, and that would give you an idea if they're congruent or not. So I started with AB and found the length of that. So I did -2 minus 0 and squared that and got 4. And then I did 0 minus 4 and got -4 and squared that and got 16. So the length I left as just square root of 20. You can go ahead and change it to a decimal form, but you should be able to see if these are the same based off what numbers underneath the square root. So then I did the same thing for BC since it's next to AB. So I did 0 minus 4, which is -4, squared it and got 16. 4 minus 5 is -1, squared that and got 1, and then added those and got square root of 17. Notice that those two sides are not congruent, so there's no way that all four sides are congruent. So if you look at our flow chart, our next thing is we want to check if we have four right angles. So in order to check that, I have to see if my lines are perpendicular to each other. So if you remember, we checked it by finding the slopes of those lines. So sometimes it's hard to see just from the picture. So I'm going to need to find the slope of AB and compare that to the slope of BC and AD. So I came down here and I found the slope of AB. So using that formula for slope, it says to take y2 minus y1, so I did 4 minus 0 on top. On the bottom I subtracted my x's, so 0 minus -2, found that difference and simplified and got the slope of AB to be 2, or 2 over 1. Then the next thing I did was I found the slope of BC, so I did the slope formula again using B and C. So difference of my y's would be 1, difference of my x's would be 4, my slope is 1/4. In order for these to be right angles, they have to be perpendicular to each other. And if you remember, the definition for perpendicular lines are that your slopes are always opposites, so different signs, and reciprocals, so the flipped of each other. Notice that these are not even the same numbers or close to having the same numbers, so these would not be perpendicular. So if you look at our flow chart, we answered no to the first question, so that put us over here. And then we answered no, I don't have four right angles, so my answer has to be a parallelogram. Okay, that's a difficult process, so make sure that you understand you have two main questions. First, start with four sides congruent, so you have to do the distance formula, and then you're checking for four right angles, so you have to do the slope and see if they're opposite reciprocals of each other. Okay, pause the video and see if you can do letter B. So on letter B, I went ahead and graphed it so I could see a visual. Looks like I have pretty similar side lengths is what it appears to be, so I'm curious to see if that fits out. So I checked for four congruent sides. So I started with NM, got square root of 10. Then I checked a side next to it, NP is square root of 10. Then I just went around, PQ was square root of 10, and then QM was square root of 10. So all four sides voted yes. So I then come and I check for four right angles. So then I have to find the slope of those lines. So I found the slope of NM by plugging in my numbers here, and I got -3 when I simplified. Then I came back and I did NP. I found my slope formula, I got 1/3. Notice that these two are opposites of each other, so one's positive, one's negative. Notice they're reciprocals of each other, so 3 over 1 is 1/3. So these two lines are perpendicular, which means they form a right angle. So then I checked the other set. The other set also had PQ at -3 and MQ at 1/3. So again, these are both opposite reciprocals of each other. So my answer was yes. So if I looked at my flow chart, I put yes on the first question, yes on the second question, so that puts me at a square. So the final answer should be a square. Now again, that's a pretty difficult process and pretty in-depth, so if you have questions about it, please make sure you ask. So pause the video, get my attention so that I can come help you. Otherwise, start on the assignment.